Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the All Around Growth Podcast. My name is Rob Kaiser, and I am your host. In today's episode, we will be doing a recap of last week's monthly Patreon community call, and this was a long-awaited call. This was one of the first calls that has taken place in several months. The last call that took place with the Patreon community was several months ago, and this episode in particular is the first episode that has been released to you, the listeners, in well over 6 months. First and foremost, I would like to apologize for the delay. There has been a tremendous amount of change and growth, for lack of a better term, over the past 6 months, and I am pleased to share that with you. A lot of what we'll talk about today is that during this recap of the Patreon community call where we discussed that in depth. And if you would like to get in on these calls and learn more about what's going on behind the scenes and get a more comprehensive view of what is going on, when it's going on, how it's going on, and cultivate deeper relationships with people who support me, the work that I'm doing, and how I'm doing it, then join us over at patreon.com/allaroundgrowth and learn how you can be a part of something bigger than yourself. Because this is changing. Everything is changing. And with that said, I would like to just simply get right into it. So last week on the Patreon community call and the monthly update, it was a small group call. And it was simply myself and Kyriaki. The key takeaways from that call were the fact that Kyriaki and I announced that we were engaged. That's right. You heard that correctly. We are engaged. I proposed to her in June, and I proposed to her at the St. Photios National Shrine in Florida, which I will link to in the show notes, during a trip down there to visit her family and friends and basically make a road trip back here from there. Her mom flew up here and they drove down to Florida together, and I flew down there to drive back here. And on the way back, we stopped in St. Augustine and took a day trip around there. And all during the trip, I carried an engagement ring with me, and it seemed like the appropriate time to do so at that shrine in front of the reliquary, which contained the relics of St. Paul, St. Peter, St. Titus, St. Harlampus, St. Anthony the Great, St. Ambrose, St. Athanasius, St. Basil the Great, St. Constantine, St. Cyril of Jerusalem, St. Gregory of Nazianzus, St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Helena, St. John Chrysostom, St. Nicholas of Myra, St. Cyril of Alexandria, St. Savas, and St. John of Damascus. Furthermore, the reliquary was on top of a marble pedestal with a mosaic of St. Kyriaki, and it seemed incredibly appropriate due to the timing and the lack of people in the shrine at that time. With that said, we also, during the call last week, discussed something that she and I have been talking about and something that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and that is how the podcast is going to shift focus. This was a podcast where we discussed goal planning and life that revolved around our financial goals, income, investments, 1-year goals, 3-year goals, our physical goals regarding our health, appearance, exercise, personal development, knowledge, education, self-improvement, family, our relationship to others, development of children, where we want to live, so on and so forth, our spiritual life, our personal commitment, theological understandings, meditation, our social life, our friendships, our community involvement, things of that nature, and also our careers, our career ambitions, dreams, and our hopes. And as of the last few months, last few years for that matter, the podcast evolved into something of a homestead-oriented show where there were homestead updates and property walks and renting dumpsters for the big farm clean out and talking about DIY shelving for garages and barns. But at the same time, there was also a fair amount of content about orthodoxy, with episodes on St. John Chrysostom and episodes titled Confronting Acedia, Reflections for the Nativity Fast, and A Seasonal Hiatus. And I did the same thing last year, where I took time around Great Lent and took a break. And the reality is that over the past few years with my involvement in the church, the podcast is simply going to shift focus from where it was to my own journey within the Orthodox Church. We discussed the last call last month because it was unrecorded. And I discussed some of that with her. And in that call last month, we talked about some Orthodox feast days, particularly John the Baptist, because the call last month took place on the feast day of the Nativity of John the Baptist. And at the time of the release of this episode, we will be in the Dormition fast, and we will be coming up on the Feast of the Transfiguration. And for those of you who are not familiar with what the Feast of the Transfiguration is, the Transfiguration of Christ is one of the great feasts of the Orthodox Church, celebrated on August 6th. Jesus had gone with his disciples Peter, James, and John to Mount Tabor, and Christ's appearance was changed while they watched into a glorious, radiant figure. And there appeared Elijah and Moses speaking with Jesus. So, in short, the Feast of the Transfiguration, celebrated on August 6th in the Orthodox Church, commemorates the event described in the Gospels, where Jesus' appearance was transformed, revealing his divine glory to Peter, James, and John on Mount Tabor. And this event is a significant feast highlighting the divinity of Christ and the possibility of theosis, or divinization, for believers. There is also the blessing of grapes, which are then brought into the church as first fruits. And that is something that I have never experienced. So I look forward to sharing that experience with you next week. And if everything works out right, we will have a special experience to share with you, but more on that later. And but right now, let's get back to a summarization of the community call. We also talked about how Kyriaki is downsizing possessions, and she shared her experience with how she is getting rid of things and how that relates to her personal identity. And she, more than I, talked about the importance of community. We both talked about that. The importance of community within the Orthodox tradition and how it contrasted with American consumerism. As we spoke, we again talked about the previous unrecorded meeting, and we talked about the various topics in the unrecorded meeting, and basically just shared a summary of the unrecorded Patreon community call. What had happened, what took place, is that I did a Zoom meeting and I had the AI companion notes from Zoom, but I forgot to record the meeting. So I had no audio and no video for the Patreon subscribers. So unfortunately, all I had to go on was the notes, and what I also failed to do was to give a summary like I'm doing now. So despite the fact that I was very excited to share that content and I felt that it was a good episode, it was a complete failure because of the fact that I had nothing to share. I dropped the ball and I did not record anything. So it wasn't a complete failure. I had the AI summary, and for those who are not aware, that is one wonderful feature of Zoom is the AI companion and how it generates the summary. I am a big fan of that feature and how it works, and I would strongly recommend using it if you host meetings in any way, shape, or form. We use it for our family meetings here on the homestead, and it helps us stay on track and keep things organized, especially with next steps and who's accountable for what. So big shout out to Zoom and what they can do. As far as the Orthodox feast days, we had a pretty significant discussion about the significance and the frequency of feast days in the Orthodox tradition. And we talked about how the Orthodox Church celebrates numerous feast days throughout the year, including 12 great feasts. And like I said, we talked about the upcoming Feast of the Transfiguration on August 6th and the Dormition Fast, which takes place from August 1st through the 14th. And again, some of you guys may be wondering what the Dormition Fast is. And for those of you who are, I will talk about that very briefly here. The Dormition of the Theotokos is one of the great feasts of the Orthodox Church, celebrated on August 15th. The Feast of the Dormition, which is also sometimes called the Assumption, commemorates the death, resurrection, and glorification of Christ's mother. It proclaims that Mary has been assumed by God into the heavenly kingdom of Christ in the fullness of her spiritual and bodily existence. And in preparation for this feast, the feast is preceded by 14 days of strict fasting, with the exceptions that fish is eaten on the Feast of the Transfiguration, August 6th, and on weekdays before the feast, either the Great Paraclesis, the service of supplication, or the Small Paraclesis is celebrated every day during the week. So we look forward to having those prayer services beginning this Friday, August 1st. And as I'm recording this, today is Thursday, July 31st, and this is set to probably be released on Monday, August 4th, just for your reference. By this time, we will have had one paracelsus service, and that's it. There's a lot that I'm talking about here that may sound unfamiliar. I'll link to some of this in the show notes, and a lot of what I'm reading from is from orthodoxwiki.org. A paracelsus is a service of supplication specifically for the living, as opposed to a memorial service, which is a supplication for the departed. This service is most often addressed to the Theotokos, but may be used to seek the intercessions of any saint. The distinguishing feature of a paracelsus is the inclusion of a supplicatory canon to the saint whose intercessions are being sought. A paracelsus can be served as a standalone service or in a slightly abbreviated form in conjunction with Vespers. It is appropriate to be served at any time of need. Moving forward in the show, I will share my own experience as I grow in the church, and that is all. And hopefully have the opportunity to perhaps even interview other people and have discussions with other people to talk about not only Orthodoxy, but Christianity in general, because the reason All Around Growth is transitioning to a show that is largely centered on Christianity, and in my case, Orthodoxy, is because All Around Growth cannot take place unless you have a firm foundation that is built upon a spiritual life. So it's great to have all of these goals in mind, and it's great to think about financial and physical and personal development and family and spiritual and social and career goals. But I have reached a point where personally, unless my spiritual life is strong, I can't make progress in any other aspect in my life. So it is the spiritual component of life that I am going to speak about in depth. And from time to time, other aspects of life will be discussed. So yes, we talked a lot about feast days. Furthermore, as we continued our discussion last week, we talked about our engagement, and we formally announced our engagement. I talked about how I proposed to her. We've shared that with many people. We have a public save the date on Facebook. I will go ahead and link to that in the show notes as well, so that you can see the save the date. We have some photos there as well, and we're happy to share the news with you, and we're happy to share the news with our community, and you are a part of our community. Our church is a part of our community, and we are happy to share the news with people that are happy for us. It's an exciting time to share this excitement with other people who are excited for us. Quite frankly, it's an amazing thing that has taken place, and I don't really know how else to describe it other than that. And we are all very happy, and we feel quite blessed about how plans have worked out, and how God has decided to place us in each other's lives so that we can move forward in life together. The discussion about downsizing and letting go of possessions was also interesting and nice. Over the past year or so, as Kyriaki described her experience downsizing, she talked about it as a weight being lifted off her shoulders, and has and talked about selling all kinds of things that she never thought that she would, including her stand-up paddleboard and things that she used to really enjoy using, and stuff that she used to really enjoy using, except this is all stuff that she hasn't had an opportunity to use over the last couple of years. And I can appreciate what she's doing, and I find it inspiring because this is something that I need to do myself, but I simply have not done so. And as she talked, I brought up a recent Wrangler Star video that I think was titled, "I Got Rid of 90% of Everything I Own." And I sent that to her, and what was funny is she said that she saw that in her own feed, and she almost sent that to me. So, but she decided not to, because I think that she understands that I'm having some difficulty going through my own possessions, because I still have things in boxes that I have not gone through since moving back here from California, and that was over 10 years ago. And she connected the process of letting go of possessions to reassessing one's personal identity. And I think that personally for me, I would benefit a lot from doing the same thing that she is doing. And hopefully, as we get closer to our marriage, and then shortly thereafter, I can actually spend some time doing that. Some concluding thoughts on this are that downsizing possessions can be emotionally challenging, but ultimately freeing. And the idea that material possessions can often become tied to our sense of identity is also something that we talked about, and that they do not define us and who we are. And furthermore, the discussion about our identity beyond our possessions and beyond our career was a great discussion that we had, in that we had a discussion about what exactly it was that defines a person beyond these material things and our career. And she talked about how her identity was previously tied to her career and recreational activities, and I had agreed with the sentiment. And she made an observation that in Orthodox countries like Greece, the country where her parents are from, people tend to center their lives around community rather than their possessions. And all I could do was simply agree that hobbies and activities and careers don't define who we are. But what I did do was express my desire for a life in Christ and the church to be part of what defines me. We did both agree that community, faith, and relationships are more important than material possessions or career identities. And I think that we are in agreement there because we have both lived lives where we valued material possessions and career identities more than we valued community, faith, and relationships. And it is no wonder that at that point in our lives, when we did that, we found ourselves less happy than we do now. That segued into a conversation about the Orthodox community and the values that the community has, and what one example of the strong sense of community that I gave was just this last Sunday. There was a memorial service. And what happens at a memorial service is when someone dies in the Orthodox Church, 40 days after the death of that person, there is a brief memorial service after the Divine Liturgy on Sunday, where some prayers are said, and oftentimes there is something called koliva, or just some simple bread is given out and shared with people. Koliva is an offering of boiled wheat that is blessed liturgically in connection with the memorial services in church for the benefit of one's departed, thereby offering unto God, as it were, a sacrifice of atonement for the dead person and in honor of the sovereign Lord over life and death. While recipes may widely vary, the primary ingredient in today's koliva consists of wheat kernels or wheat berries, which have been boiled until they are soft. They are usually mixed with a variety of ingredients, which may include pomegranate seeds, sesame seeds, almonds, ground walnuts, cinnamon, sugar, raisins, anise, and parsley. The koliva mixture is then placed on a platter and shaped into a mound or cake to resemble a grave. The whole of it is then decorated with a powdered sugar covering, and often with Jordan almonds, raisins, or other sweets decoratively placed on the surface. A cross is traced or created with the sweets on top, and on its sides are placed the initials of the departed for whom the memorial is held. A candle is often placed in the center of the koliva and is lit at the beginning of the memorial service and extinguished at its end, and the candle symbolizes the light wherewith the Christian is illumined in baptism, and also the light of the world to come, which knows no setting. This is an interesting tradition, and it's a beautiful tradition because every family makes it differently. And I'm going to continue reading just so you can see the depth within the church. Some Orthodox parishes have a designated individual charged with making the koliva. This is in part due to the health risk of fermented wheat if the koliva is not prepared correctly. Sometimes koliva is made with rice instead of wheat, and this custom began as a practical response to a famine that occurred in Soviet Russia when the faithful did not have wheat available for koliva, so they used rice instead. Some communities continue to use rice for their koliva to this day. In the Japanese Orthodox Church, where rice is mainly eaten, koliva is commonly made from rice sweetened with sugar and decorated with raisins without reference to famine. And it goes on. It's the origin of koliva predates Christianity, and so much of what we do in the Orthodox Church predates Christianity. A lot of what is done in Orthodoxy predates Christianity, and we carry on the tradition of we carry on a lot of Judaic traditions because Jesus was a Jew. And that's not to say that we execute and live out Jewish traditions. No, that's absolutely not correct. But some of the remnants of those traditions remain. But the church is a growing, living organism that continues to change while new traditions are added. And this is one example of something that has lived on and continues to change and grow, with rice being used instead of wheat as a prime example of a way in which traditions change. After the memorial service, the family who lost their father and uncle, and they put together a feast of lamb and rice and a wonderful salad and labna, which is like a yogurt, basically this incredible Arabic meal. They served everyone. It was a 3 lambs and maybe 3 big pans of this Lebanese rice, and probably enough for, I don't know how many people were there, 140 people or something like that. It was absolutely incredible, and the whole point was to serve the community, share with the community, and it is just it's very clear to me. My first experience at this church was also with food, and that was how I was greeted, with food. And it's been and so many times all throughout the year, it's just very clear to me that the Orthodox tradition brings people together in Christ, community, family, friendship, and yes, indeed, in food. And, again, Kyriaki brought up how this is a stark contrast to, the consumerism mindset in America, and how this is so different than the community-centric approach in many Orthodox countries. So, just that dialogue about how the Orthodox Church fosters such strong community bonds through the tradition, and but basically through the tradition of the church, was just a wonderful conversation to have. So, what I'm hoping to do moving forward is, maintain these consistent Patreon community calls. Like I said, this was the first one that was recorded in several months. I'm grateful that Kyriaki was able to make it on the call. We did not plan to do that in advance. It just so happened that I jumped on the call and she jumped on the call, and it was the two of us, and we ended up talking about a lot of the things that we talk about in our own life together. And so for anybody that watches that in the Patreon community, because that's where the video is, it's posted. The videos from the Patreon video calls are posted on the Patreon page for paid subscribers, and they are also available for one-time purchases for anybody that's interested. My hope is that I can get back into the rhythm of doing these regularly and get back into the rhythm of creating content, because I miss this. I enjoy creating content, and I'm hopeful that moving forward and updating the focus of the show from the content from what it was to orthodoxy is going to give me a little bit of motivation to stay consistent with it, because quite frankly, I felt like homesteading was not who and what I was. That was something that was discussed last month as well, that I had kind of been living a bit of a lie, so to speak, and that I'm not the homesteader that I thought I was. And it's been a difficult realization to come to grips with. I didn't want to admit that. In 2012, I started making an action plan to leave California and move back here. So 13 years ago, I started making an action plan to leave Southern California to move back here and help my parents turn this property into a homestead. I helped my brother and my father build this cabin and build this barn and build this office where I'm recording this podcast right now. I tried to be a homesteader, and a lot of the goals that I set and a lot of the life that I lived in the past was simply a life that was not my own. I spent a lot of time chasing dreams that were other people's and living a life consistently in the church has forced me to get honest with myself and come to grips with the reality that is. And the reality is that I'm not who I thought I was. And if I want to find peace, then I have to make some change. I have to continue making change, and I have to make real change. And that's not easy. And I guess that's what all-around growth really is. So I'm going to link to all of the things that I talked about in the show notes. This isn't easy. I don't like coming back to tell and share with you how much of a failure that I feel like. But my hope is that by being authentic and honest, that it will empower you to make some difficult change and get through some hard times in your own life. So with that, that's it for today. I look forward to catching you on the next episode, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. This is Rob Kaiser, and God bless.